Hi everyone, welcome back to Job 1 for All. In this video, we are going to talk about arrays. So before we start, let's create a new class. I will close everything and then go to my package and right click, new class, class 07 arrays 01 ESVM, and then press tab. Now, when should we use arrays? Well, imagine that I ask you, I would like you to store the age of 3 people. With everything that you know so far, you would probably do something like this. Age 1, and then age 2, and then probably age 3. So basically we have 3 ages in 3 different spaces in memory that in any case, if I want you to print or to get all these values again, you will probably have to write 3 of these guys. So when we have situations like this where you would like to kind of group the same data, for example, they are ages and they are of the same type, that's integer. In these specific cases, we can use arrays because arrays will group them in one space in memory, and you can achieve with one single line the access for all of them. So how can we actually do how this array works? So basically, let's start with some drawings because it will be easier for us to understand. So far, we have been doing something like this. We do have a variable, and this variable is doing his job by referencing one space in memory. So basically we have age, and here if we add the value 13, for example, we can get this value by just calling age again. Now, when we are working with arrays, we would like to have the same variable, but now with multiple spaces in memory. And we can achieve something like this. This is what we are looking for. Basically, we want one space, one big space with several blocks inside. And now I want my variable age to kind of have a reference not to one place in particular, but to the whole thing. This is just what an array is, and for that we just have to change the syntax a little bit. The syntax for arrays are like this. So let me just increase the font size a little bit. So basically you add some brackets, and after the type you do have now the array. This is bothering me more than it should. Now let's go and do this in our code. Basically I want now ages, and we know that we just have to add the brackets, and now we have an array. Well, technically we don't have an array just yet. There are a couple of things that we have to be careful here. First is that you can use these either right after or right after the type or right after the identifier. They will have exactly the same result, but the best way to do it is the way we did, right after the type. Why is that? Because when you are reading, you kind of immediately knows that this is an array of integers. You can also have on both sides, but then we have a different kind of array, but we are going to talk about that later. So just remember that the brackets position doesn't actually matter. It's just a thing of the convention. Now, we do have here what we call a reference variable. Basically, this variable is not just an integer. You cannot just assign 0 for that, for example, because now we are having a reference variable. And reference variables, if you have to initialize with some value, by default, they are always pointing to null, to nowhere. So basically, this would work if we do something like this. So if we try to use these ages without having this initialized, it would give us an exception. And if you want to just initialize, then we have null. Basically, null says, hey, this is a variable that it's not doing anything, it's not pointing or referencing any place in memory specifically. So basically, it's just hanging there. And none of the primitive types can actually do this. So for example, if you add here, or let's change it for example, double salary, you cannot just start with null because they are primitive types, and all the primitive types, they need their specific type to initialize. We are going to talk about what kind of default initialization we have for each one of the variable types later. So basically, the other type that can do this, because it's also a reference, and you can see that here we do have a uppercase letter, is the string. So string can also start with null because it is a reference type. Okay, William, now that I know how to create an array, actually a reference to an array, how can I actually create these spaces in memory? Well, in Java, it's pretty simple. You can use the word new, because since a reference variable can point to null, it means that it can also point to an object. And an array is always an object. So basically, new, and you can see here that IntelliJ is telling us. Now, in this case, you cannot have something like this. It will not work. It needs to be right after the type. And one tiny rule, you always need to give the size of the array. So basically here, what's the size? 3. So we can define the size right here. But there's one big catch, that if you're new to programming, the index always starts with 0. So even though the size is 3, the index will be max 2. This means that these guys, let me copy here a text. So basically the index this guy has is 0, and then here is 1, and here is 2. So that's how you can access the spaces in memory, through its index. Now, you're saying that if I just get this index, we can see the value? Yes. So basically now, if I just print it like this, without getting any specific space in memory, you will see the value of the reference this variable is using to get the object. Basically, this is a kind of memory reference that's this variable is holding. There is other ways once we talk about some utility classes to print the values that we have inside an array, but so far you just have to remember that this is a reference variable, and this is always, even though it's a primitive type, an object. And if you want to access a specific position, you can just call that specific position. And like this, you will get a 0. So all the primitive types and all the reference types, they do have their default initialization. For numeric values, it will be 0, and for objects will be null. So for now, all the spaces that we have here, they have 0 inside. And how do we actually give something? Well, the same way you would print, but you just use the assign operator. So basically, position 1, position 2, and then I just give some values, and this now is 12, 13, and 14. And if I just print position 0, Ctrl Shift F10, we will get 12, 12, 12. So basically, what we have here is this. Got the wrong one. So this tiny image right here is what is happening when we do this. William, what happens if I try to access a position that does not exist? Well, Java won't be happy, but if you do try to assign something to position 2 again, for example, a new value, I can even try to 0. You will see that it will just replace the value that we have there. But if you try to access something, an index that does not exist, you will get an exception. And this exception will be probably around you for a while. Array index out of bound exception. It means that you are trying to access a position in an array that does not exist. If you either try to assign or to print something, you will get the same exception. Now, just to finish this class with a little bit more rules, the only place where you are going to see the new keyword together with a primitive type is when you are creating arrays. Okay, so I think that's enough information for one video. Let's continue in the next one. Bye.